So let's get into the meat of this. So preparation. Preparation for a tornado is essentially going to be looking for shelter areas within your building. Now, if your church has a tornado shelter, awesome. You don't even have to think about this for the most part, right? I guess it depends on how big that tornado shelter is. But anyway, you want to look at your building and try to decide where's going to be the best place to shelter people. Now, typically, the gold standard, of course, is a basement, getting underground. And you want to, and that's where you're going to have the greatest success. So even if that tornado comes through and wipes your church off its foundations, you're still safely in a basement. The only time you would want to, well, let me say a couple things about that shelter. The first thing is this. A good tornado shelter is going to have some supplies in it, at minimum, water, first aid, and then a weather radio, which we're going to talk about more later. But anyway, you want those basic things. Sometimes you might even consider games and food to some extent, just in case you're stuck in that shelter for longer than you intend. The other thing is you want the door that goes into the shelter to open inward. And the idea behind that is this, is if there's a bunch of debris just outside that door and the door opens outward, the debris is going to hold that door shut. So you want to make sure that door opens inward. And then worst case scenario, you open that door, if there's debris in front of it, maybe you can move it out of the way and get out yourself. Or if nothing else, you can open up that door. If the whole roof is on top of the building, then at least rescuers you're going to be able to shout, yell, get people's attention. Rescuers will know you're down there and that kind of deal. That's where communication comes into handy too. If you have landline phone, now just depending on how the infrastructure set up, maybe even a landline won't work if all the wires were pulled out and all that good stuff. But definitely towers for cell phones, they're probably the least reliable. That's sometimes I talk to younger people and everyone's really on a cell phone these days. But one of the things that we kind of miss is the stability of a landline. But anyway, going on from that. So the basement's your best choice. The next thing is getting as low as possible. So that's now your first floor, your ground level. Now, as a general rule, what you want to do is you want to get people towards the center of the church. And because we're getting away from windows, we're getting away from the walls that are most likely to be ripped away from the building. The other thing is we're looking for smaller rooms. So when we think about gymnasiums and sanctuaries and stuff like that, those rooms are absolutely horrible for tornado shelters because that long roof span, that ceiling span, is likely to collapse, just like in that one story. It kind of lifted it up and then threw it down on them. And so those large rooms are not good. We want to get into like narrow hallways. We want to get into smaller rooms and stay as far away from windows in that exterior wall as we can. Now you have to look at your church, so some of you are like, we go to a small church, we just don't, we're just in deep trouble because it's mostly, like I used to go to a church where it was like 70% of it was the sanctuary. It was all on the ground floor. It was just on the ground floor. 70% was the sanctuary. And then you had a couple offices, bathrooms, and a little kitchen area. So it was really super small. There really was no place for a tornado shelter, and I'm going to cover that in a minute here. But going back to that lowest floor on the inside the best you can. Now, when you're looking for these for these shelter areas for tornadoes, one of the things that you might need to consider, depending on the structure, is you get a floor plan and you come up with red, green, and yellow areas. And what it basically saying is the red areas are places where you definitely don't want anyone to be. So I think about my past church. the lobby was opened up into a second story, so it's an open design, if you will. So you could see the roof, and you could see, and then of course along one wall was nothing but glass doors and lots of glass. And so basically that was the worst. That's a red room by all accounts, that nobody should be in that room if a tornado hits. And then, so that's a red area. The green area is that ideal ground floor or basement area that's centered, in the center of the building, protected, all that kind of stuff. And then you might have some yellow areas where it's like, kind of like your emergency overflow, right? So it's like, hey, we got too many people here. So we've already filled up the green area. What are we going to do with these additional people? And that's where you have those yellow areas. So you just have to look at your building, figure out the best part, make some maps up, put them around the church so people can see. Maybe even get a sign. If you have a tornado shelter, get some of those signs that say tornado shelter and shows a little tornado on next to it. And you put those up on different or near different doors, different rooms, so people know that that's the place that they're supposed to go. And some people will notice that as they're walking around the building. So that's that. Center room, good marking, good planning, all that kind of stuff, all that stuff put into place, having those supplies in there. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of warnings. Now, depending on where you are in the country, or where you are in relation to a city or rural area, or maybe you live out in the middle of the country, but we need to have good warning systems. Now, if you live like in a kind of a neighborhood I do, we have tornado sirens, and they test them every Wednesday or the first Wednesday of the month to make sure that they're working. And if there's a tornado, that siren goes off. They're designed to warn people that are outside to get inside in the shelter. Now, depending on how close you are, you're definitely going to hear it in the house too. For us, there's actually one house to our, what would that be, to our south, and then that's where the tornado siren is. So we don't sleep through any tornadoes. But other than that, you want to look at maybe your cell phone. A lot of cell phones have alerts that you can set up, weather alerts that you can set up to let you know what's going on. The app that I use actually has the weather radar on it. I like that because a lot of times when you get that warning, that tornado warning that something's about to occur, or there's a tornado spotted on radar or in person, you want to know where it is in relation to where you are. Because here, if Scott County, the county I live in, is kind of odd shaped, but it's pretty big too. And so a tornado bearing down on towns to the north of us, we might even, it's funny, and we're almost like we're in a different weather pattern down here. And so if the tornado sirens go off, I want to be able to look at my phone, look at that radar, and see if we're in the track of it or not. But anyway, you can have those warnings set up on your cell phone. But also keep in mind this, cell phone towers can be torn down. So the next best thing is, just like landlines, if you will, a lesser technology is superior to the newer technology. The same thing happens with severe all hazard radios. These are your NOAA weather radios. They're absolutely good because FM signal is still more reliable than internet and Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. So getting a good weather radio is extremely important. One of the things that they offer now is they call it SAME technology, and that's an acronym. And let me get the acronym correct. It's Specific Area Message Encoding. And basically what one of the things NOAA has figured out is if you get a lot of false alarms, you get a lot of false warnings, what happens is you start to tone them out. You don't even listen to them anymore. And that's really bad, right? Because the one you need to pay attention to might be one that you ignored because there was 30 others that didn't matter. And so with this technology, what it does is it starts to narrow down the area. So instead of, like I said here, the tornado sirens go off based on the county. And so that's a big area, and so it might not apply to us. So I have to look at the weather radar to know if it matters. With same technology, I think Scott County has something like 12 different zones. And so what you can do is you can go to that weather radio with same technology and you put in a unique code for the area that you want to be alerted for. Now, some of them allow you to add like 100 codes. I think that's really dumb because you're almost doing exactly, you're setting yourself up for the thing I was warning you about, and that's all the false alarms. I would get it down just to the code for the church. And now if you're really close to a border, if you will, then maybe considering putting in the next border. But once again, if it's affecting your area, it's going to alert. And so I would just kind of put that one code in there, maybe two, nothing more. And then take that thing, and if you have a sound booth or a security room where you have cameras and maybe you have someone monitoring the cameras, just put that radio in there and have somebody monitoring it along with the cameras. Or like I said, if you got a sound booth where they can make noise and it doesn't bleed out into the sanctuary, stick it in there so that way if it goes off, people, it's right there. You can't ignore it. They get on the radio, let you know that you have something to do. So warnings are extremely important. So the two things we talked about is having some sort of warning system, and then two, setting up or designating or finding those areas in your church that are safe. There's one note I almost forgot I wanted to bring up is this. So one of the churches I used to go to, the one I was talking about with the lobby and the big glass windows, there was too many people in that building on Sunday. Which is a good problem to have on a normal Sunday, but if there's a tornado coming at us, then we have a problem because there was no way in the world we were going to be able to get all those people into those green and yellow areas. It was just too many. So one of the policies, one of the procedures we had to put into place was this, is if there was a tornado warning and we determined that it was coming at us or it was going to be very close to us, what we would have to do is we would have to interrupt the service, hand the pastor basically a little card, and let them know, hey, there's a tornado warning, we're going to have to evacuate. And there was a little script for them, and they would know, we'd hand them that card. You could even go into color coding, but hand that pastor that card, let them know, hey, we have to take action because this thing's going to be close, if not hitting us head on. And then what we had to do is we would put the weather radar on the screen. So it was a larger church, so we had two screens that they would put, sermon notes and all that good stuff on. And we would have to show them the radar and say, hey, here's the weather coming in, and this is how it looks, and this is how fast it's moving. And then we'd say, it's up to you, but we believe there may be time for some of you to evacuate. And as long as you're not driving towards the storm, you're driving away from the storm, maybe you can get home and get into your own basement and get out of here. And then we would end church, and we would have to rapidly close things down, and then take everybody else and get them into those shelter areas. And that's what some of us are going to have to do. I think about the church I went to in Alabama, Madison, Alabama. That's that church I was talking about. It was actually just a metal building, like you'd almost like a warehouse type thing. And there's no basement. It's just ground floor, and then it's metal, framing, sheetrock, carpet. That's it. And that's an example of if a tornado's coming for us, we have to leave that building. That building would not hold up against a tornado. Now, maybe the best thing you could have done in that church is gone into the two bathrooms, but the male and female bathrooms were not like big. So, I suppose if you're properly motivated, you might have been able to get 10 into each bathroom, stacked in there like cordwood. But that still left, we had an average attendance of like 50 people. That still left 30 people out in the open. So anyway, you have to look at your building, make that plan. So communication, medical supplies, water, maybe food, maybe games, proper signage, a good alert system, a way where you can track storms and make sure you're giving some good policies and procedures. And then really too, practicing a practicing a tornado drill, depending on where you are, at least once a year. If you're someplace where tornadoes almost never happen, then maybe you don't have to do it once a year. But at least do it occasionally so your team is up to snuff. They got a good feel for how it works. The staff knows what to do. High capacity volunteers know what to do. If your church doesn't have a huge turnover and the majority of the people understand what to do in case of tornado, newcomers, guests, and stuff like that, they see everybody moving towards a certain room, they're going to follow along, especially if they're getting instructions by the pastors to follow along and ushers and all that other kind of stuff. So at least practice it occasionally. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are going into tornado season. Especially if you're in Tornado Alley, I think you're already well into your tornado season. Here in Minnesota, knocking on the door of that season for us. And so know your area, you know what's going on. If you don't, find out and start planning and practicing for these types of things. This might be a good time to get the team together. And regardless of where you are in your training and preparation and policy making or procedure making, at least have this discussion with your team and say, hey, all right guys, I got a curveball for you. It's that time of year. What would we do if a tornado occurred? And then have a discussion and get everyone kind of on at least the team, and maybe talk to staff and ushers and stuff, get them on a basic plan so if it happens, at least you're kind of prepared, and then work towards that better plan.